Have you ever looked at some huge, life-changing achievement and just thought, how? How did they do that? We tend to think it takes some massive, heroic effort. But what if the real secret to incredible success isn't about giant leaps at all? What if it's about something so small you'd barely even notice it? Well, today, we're diving straight into James Clear's Atomic Habits to see how these tiny 1% changes can pile up to create some truly extraordinary results.
So here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off with one of the most amazing turnaround stories in the history of sports. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty, the powerful math behind why this works. After that, we'll explore that frustrating feeling when you're working hard but going nowhere, what's called the plateau of potential. And finally, we'll get to the big one, why focusing on your systems, not your goals, is the real key to unlocking success that actually lasts.
You know, to really understand what massive success looks like, we've got to start with a story of, well, profound and consistent failure. So let's talk about the story of British cycling.
In this whole story really just begs one fascinating question. How does a team that was, and I'm not exaggerating, a literal laughingstock in their sport, a team famous for being mediocre, suddenly start winning, well, pretty much everything? The answer is surprisingly simple, but it's also incredibly powerful.
Okay, so for the better part of 100 years, British cycling was basically a joke. I mean, get this, in an entire century, they managed to win just one single Olympic gold medal. No British cyclist had ever won the Tour de France. They were so bad that one of the top bike manufacturers in Europe actually refused to sell them bikes. They were afraid it would hurt their brand if other professional riders saw the Brits using their equipment. That's how bad it was. But then, in 2003, everything started to change. They hired a new performance director named Dave Brailsford, and he came in with this kind of radical obsession with one core idea he called the aggregation of marginal gains. It's a pretty simple philosophy, really. You search for a tiny, tiny margin of improvement in absolutely everything that you do.
Brailsford and his team literally broke down everything you could think of that goes into riding a bike, and they tried to improve each little piece by just 1%. Now, they started with the obvious stuff, right? Like making the bike seats more comfortable. But then they went way, way deeper, into areas nobody else was even thinking about. They tested different massage gels to see which one led to faster muscle recovery. They hired a surgeon to teach the riders the right way to wash their hands to avoid getting sick. They even painted the inside of the team truck white so they could spot little specks of dust that might mess with the finely tuned bikes. Nothing, and I mean nothing, was too small to improve.
So what was the result? Well, all these hundreds of tiny 1% improvements started to stack on top of each other, and they compounded into what many people call the most successful run in the entire history of cycling. In just a decade, they won 178 world championships, 66 Olympic gold medals, and took home 5 Tour de France victories. The aggregation of marginal gains? Yeah, it worked.
And that amazing story is the perfect lead-in to our next section. Let's actually unpack the powerful mathematics that made that whole transformation possible.
You know, what's so interesting here is that this chart visualizes a huge mistake that I think we all make. We tend to overestimate the importance of these big, dramatic moments, and we completely underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. You can see it right here. Those tiny 1% gains, they shoot upward into something incredible. But those tiny 1% declines, they send you spiraling all the way down towards zero.
The difference that a tiny 1% change can make over time is, well, it's just astounding. If you could manage to get just 1% better each day for a year, you don't end up 365% better. No, you end up 37 times better. And on the flip side, getting 1% worse every day doesn't just knock you back a bit. It practically wipes out all of your progress, taking you down almost to nothing. So this number right here, 37.78, this is the whole ball game. This is the magic of compounding. Those little daily improvements, they don't just add up, they multiply. They build on each other, creating this kind of exponential growth. It starts as a slow burn, but eventually it turns into a wildfire of progress.
And that brings us to really the central idea of the book. Habits are basically the compound interest of self-improvement. It's a perfect analogy. Just like money multiplies with compound interest in the bank, the effects of your habits multiply every time you repeat them. The real payoff, it isn't something you see overnight, but give it time and it becomes massive.
Okay, so if the math is so clear and so powerful, why is it so darn hard to stick with new habits? Why do we so often feel like we're just spinning our wheels, getting nowhere, and then we just give up?
I want you to imagine an ice cube sitting in a cold room. You start to slowly raise the temperature. 28 degrees, nothing. 30 degrees, still nothing. 31 degrees, you've still just got a solid block of ice. But then you hit 32 degrees, and bam, a breakthrough. A huge change is suddenly unlocked. But it wasn't that 1 degree shift that did all the work. It was all the degrees that came before it that made the breakthrough possible.
This is what real progress actually looks like. We expect it to be a nice, neat, straight line going up. But the reality is this compounding curve. And that gap between what we expect to happen and what actually happens, is what James Clear calls the valley of disappointment. If you've ever felt like you're putting in the work but seeing zero results, you're not failing. You're just in the valley, storing up all that potential energy.
This quote just nails the idea perfectly. Your work is not being wasted. It's building up pressure. It's building potential. Mastery requires having the patience to just keep hammering away at that rock, trusting that the 101st blow is coming.
All right, now we're getting to what might be the single most important mental shift in this whole explainer. This is the idea that separates the consistent winners from pretty much everyone else. It's time to kinda forget about goals.
Let's be super clear about the difference here. A goal is the result you want, right? Win the championship. A system is the process that leads you to that result. It's how you recruit, how you manage your team, how you practice every single day. Look, goals are great for setting a direction, but it's the systems that actually make the progress happen.
When you focus only on the prize, you run into some really big problems. First of all, winners and losers have the same goals, right? Every Olympian wants the gold medal. Second, when you achieve a goal, it's just a momentary change. If you have a messy room and your goal is to clean it, you clean it, but it's just going to get messy again if you don't change your system of tidiness. Third, it basically puts your happiness on hold. You tell yourself, I'll be happy when I reach this goal. And finally, what happens after you achieve it? Often your motivation just disappears.
This quote just sums it all up perfectly. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Your progress isn't ultimately determined by how big your ambitions are. It's determined by the quality and the consistency of your daily routines. Your system is your safety net. It's what catches you.
Okay, so let's tie all of this together. We've seen the incredible story, we've looked at the math, we've talked about the pitfalls and the big mental shift. So now let's nail down the definition of the central concept we've been building up to.
So, an atomic habit isn't just any old small habit. It is a tiny change, a 1% improvement that acts as a fundamental building block inside a much larger system. Think of it this way. Just like atoms are the building blocks of molecules, these atomic habits are the building blocks of remarkable results. They are small, for sure, but they are also incredibly powerful.
So, have you ever been there? You decide you're going to start a new habit, maybe hit the gym, read every night, maybe finally start meditating, and you're super excited. But then, a week or two later, poof, the motivation is just gone. If that sounds familiar, trust me, you are not alone. Today, we're going to dig into the science of why that happens, and more importantly, uncover the single best way to make a new habit actually stick.
So let's just ask the big question right up front. Why is this so hard? Right? We make these big resolutions, we feel really motivated, we genuinely want to make a change, but somehow our best intentions just seem to fizzle out. If you've ever felt that frustration, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it turns out the problem isn't what we usually think it is.
You know what we almost always blame? A lack of motivation. We say things like, if only I were more disciplined, or I guess I just lost my motivation. But what if motivation isn't the real hero of the story? What if we've been relying on something that, is naturally flaky and unreliable?
To really get to the bottom of this, let's look at this really cool study from 2001. Researchers over in Great Britain got together 248 people, and the goal was pretty simple: help them build a solid exercise habit over 2 weeks. Their real mission, though, was to figure out what actually works when it comes to forming new habits.
Okay, so they split everyone into 3 groups. The first group was the control group. Their only job was to track their exercise. That's it. Group 2 was the motivation group. They also tracked their exercise, but they also got a little motivational boost. They read all about the amazing benefits of working out. And then you have the third group. They got the same motivational pep talk, but they had to do one tiny extra thing: create a specific plan for exactly when and where they were going to exercise.
Now this is where it gets fascinating. Check out these results. The control group and the motivation group,
they performed almost exactly the same. About 38% of them exercised at least once a week. So all that motivational material, it barely made a dent. But now look at the plan group. A staggering 91% of them exercised. I mean, that is more than double the others, and the only difference was that simple, concrete plan.
This just shows so clearly that a plan isn't just some nice little extra. It's an absolute game changer. It's literally the bridge that gets you from saying you'll do something to actually doing it. So what was the magic behind this simple little plan? Well, it has a name, and it's a strategy you can start using like today.
So researchers call this an implementation intention. I know, it sounds a little bit stuffy and academic, but it's actually incredibly simple. Implementation is just about putting a plan into action, and intention is your goal. So all it is a plan you make beforehand about when and where you're going to act. You're basically making the decision ahead of time, which takes all the pressure off and means you don't have to rely on willpower when the moment comes.
And the formula for it could not be easier. It's just, I will do this behavior at this time in this location. So a vague goal like, I'm going to exercise more, turns into, I will go for a 20-minute run at 5 p.m. in the park near my house. Boom, you've just given your habit a time and a place to live in the real world.
So here's the absolute key takeaway. This quote from Atomic Habits just nails it perfectly. So many of us think our problem is that we lack motivation, when what we're really missing is clarity. And implementation intention just cuts through all that fog and gives you a crystal clear path forward.
Okay, so now we get the power of having a plan. But let's take it a step further, because there's an even more powerful way to use this idea. And it all kicks off with this wild story about an 18th century French philosopher and his beautiful new robe. All right, meet Denis Diderot. For most of his life, this guy was pretty broke. But then Catherine the Great of Russia bought his library, and all of a sudden, he had money. So he bought himself this beautiful new scarlet robe. The only problem? His fancy new robe made everything else he owned look, well, old and shabby. As he put it, there was no more coordination, no more unity, no more beauty. So that one purchase kicked off this spiral. He replaced his rug, he bought expensive sculptures, he got a new leather chair. This whole phenomenon is now called the Diderot effect. And here is the key insight for us. It doesn't just happen when we're buying things. Our behaviors work the exact same way. One action often becomes the trigger for the next one, creating this powerful chain reaction.
So how can we use this little quirk of human nature to our advantage? Well, we can actually hijack the Diderot effect and use that chain reaction to build good habits. And we do that by creating something called a habit stack.
Habit stacking is just a brilliant strategy where you anchor a new habit you want to start to an old one you already have. It's really just a special version of an implementation intention. Instead of picking some random time and place, you link your new habit to something you already do automatically, every single day.
And the formula for this one is just so simple and elegant. After I do my current habit, I will do my new habit. By connecting your new behavior to an existing one, you're tapping into a pathway that's already wired into your brain. Your old habit becomes the perfect trigger to fire off the new one.
Let's look at how this might work in a morning routine. You probably already have a habit of pouring a cup of coffee, right? That's the solid anchor. So your habit stack could be, after I pour my coffee, I will meditate for 1 minute. And you can just keep building on it. After I meditate for 1 minute, I will write my to-do list for the day. You see how each action just flows right into the next? Now for this to really work, everything, and I mean everything, depends on that first domino. The secret to a successful habit stack is choosing the perfect cue. You have to pick the right existing habit to latch onto. And that cue needs to be incredibly specific. A vague cue like, when I take a break for lunch, I'll do 10 push-ups is just too fuzzy. I mean, when does the break really start? A much, much better cue is, when I close my laptop for lunch, I will do 10 push-ups. That action is immediate, it's clear, there's no ambiguity at all.
Okay, so we've looked at two really powerful tools here, implementation intentions and habit stacking. What's the common thread? What do they both have in common? Well, they both serve one single powerful principle that is the absolute key to building any new habit.
And that principle is the very first law of behavior change. Make it obvious. It's simple, really. Your brain isn't going to start a new habit if the signal to begin is invisible or confusing. So the most important step in building a better habit is making that starting line completely impossible to miss. So
Think of it like this. Here's your new toolkit for building habits. You use implementation intentions to give your habit a specific time and a place. You use habit stacking to give it a specific cue from a routine you already have. Both of these strategies work for the same reason. They make the cue to act completely and totally obvious.
So the goal isn't really to find more motivation. It's all about creating more clarity. Instead of just waiting for inspiration to decide to show up, you can design a system that makes starting your new habit the clear, obvious next step. So I'll leave you with this question. What's one habit you already do every single day without fail, and what tiny new behavior can you stack on top of it starting right now?
160 seconds, and then 90 seconds. But as the trials progressed, the struggle decayed rapidly. The escape times dropped to 60 seconds, then 30, then 15. During the first 3 trials, the subject required an average of 1.5 minutes to escape. By the last 3 trials, the action was automated. The average escape time plummeted to just 6.3 seconds. The animals stopped repeating mistakes and simply cut straight to the optimal solution. Thorndike deduced that behaviors followed by satisfying consequences are reinforced. Biological systems automate successful trial and error routines to conserve energy. When you encounter a novel, stressful situation, your internal neurological response is high. The brain is busy learning, carefully analyzing information to determine the most effective course of action. The moment you stumble upon a reward, like discovering that going for a run calms your anxiety, your brain immediately begins to catalog the events that preceded that relief. Your brain alters its strategy for the next encounter. It isolates the specific environmental cues that predicted the success and actively tunes out everything else. As the habit is created, the level of activity in the brain decreases. The chaotic firing streamlines into a single, efficient channel. Useless physical and mental movements systematically fade away until only the useful actions get reinforced. The conscious mind successfully pawns off the task to the non-conscious mind to perform it automatically. What we experience as a habit is simply the brain finalizing a reliable, low-energy solution to a recurring environmental problem.
This diagram illustrates the universal 4-step algorithmic sequence that governs all automated human behavior. Step 1 is the cue. This is the environmental trigger, a bit of information that predicts a reward. Step 2 is the craving, the motivational force. Every craving is linked to a desire to change your internal state. You want the feeling of a clean mouth rather than the act of brushing your teeth. Step 3 is the response. This is the actual execution, which occurs only if you are capable of the action and your motivation outweighs the friction of the task. Finally, step 4 is the reward. This endpoint satisfies the craving and teaches the brain which actions are worth repeating in the future. If this algorithm breaks at any point, the behavior fails. Eliminating the cue prevents the habit from ever starting. Reducing the craving removes the motivation to act. If the response requires too much effort, the action aborts. And if the reward fails to satisfy your desire, you have no reason to perform the action again. Without all 4 variables operating in exact sequence, the cycle of behavioral repetition fails to take hold. This 4-step loop divides neatly into 2 operational halves: the problem phase, where you realize a change is needed, and the solution phase, where you take action. A phone buzzes on a desk. That is the cue, which instantly creates a craving to learn the contents of the message. The immediate response is grabbing the phone and reading the text, which satisfies the craving and associates the buzzing with the action. Looking at an overflowing email inbox acts as a cue, triggering a feeling of overwhelm and a craving to feel in control. The automated response may be biting your nails, which reduces the nervous tension and delivers a temporary sense of relief. Hitting a stumbling block on a project triggers deep frustration and a craving for relief. Opening a social media app instantly delivers a sense of relief, rewarding the behavior and completing the loop. These patterns become deeply ingrained. Walking into a dark room instantly triggers flipping the light switch without a single conscious thought. By adulthood, our daily lives are almost entirely governed by these unnoticed, lightning-fast execution scripts. We slip seamlessly into decades-old patterns of acting and thinking based entirely on environmental triggers. We can actively manipulate this biological algorithm using the 4 laws of behavior change. To engineer a system for habit creation, you manipulate the variables. Make the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying. To destroy a habit, you invert the laws. Make the cue invisible, the craving unattractive, the response difficult, and the reward unsatisfying. Every goal is doomed to fail if it goes against the grain of human nature by ignoring these parameters. Many people worry that building habits will make their lives dull or take away their spontaneity. In reality, individuals who fail to automate their foundational health, learning, and financial routines often find themselves with the least amount of true freedom. Without automated basics, the conscious mind remains trapped as a bottleneck, constantly drained by making decisions about simple daily tasks. Mastering the cybernetic habit loop explicitly engineers the cognitive free space required for high-level creativity, spontaneity, and complex problem-solving. Look at this data plot. The upward spike represents our initial motivation. Within weeks, that line crashes and flatlines into complete failure. We have already established how small routines compound over long time horizons. The calculus of daily improvement is mathematically sound. Yet we are left with a glaring paradox. Beneficial actions, like exercise or meditation, often feel like a hassle after 48 hours. Meanwhile, destructive habits, like smoking or procrastination, seem to stick forever despite our best intentions. Systemic behavioral failure stems from a targeting error. We focus our effort on the wrong layer of change. To fix this, we need to execute a microanalytical deconstruction of the 3-layered model of human behavior. Long-term relapse occurs when we remain in a cognitive slumber. We attempt to force external change, while the foundational belief system operating in the background remains static. Human behavior is structured across 3 concentric layers. The outermost ring represents outcomes. This layer is concerned with results, losing weight, hitting a sales target, or winning a championship. Most traditional goal-setting frameworks live here, focusing on the specific things we want to get. The middle layer involves processes. This encompasses your systems and routines, like your gym schedule, your workflow, or your meditation practice. The deepest core is identity. This layer contains your beliefs, your worldview, your self-image, and the judgments you hold about yourself and others. All 3 levels of change are useful. Structural failure occurs specifically in the directional vector of the change being attempted. Standard goal setting attempts to mandate behavior from the outside in. It focuses on the achievement while ignoring the internal system that drives the action. This chart illustrates outcome-based habits. The focus is on what you want to achieve, with the vector pointing inward toward the identity. When offered a cigarette, a person trying to change via this inward vector might say, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." This indicates they still believe they are a smoker who is currently attempting to act like someone else. This creates significant cognitive friction. The individual hopes their behavior will change while they continue to carry the same internal beliefs. Identity-based habits reverse this vector. We start by focusing on who we wish to become, projecting the change from the core outward. When the second person declines a smoke by saying, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker," they signal a shift in identity. Smoking is no longer part of their current self-image. Moving from the inside out aligns your actions with your beliefs. The new habit takes hold because you are simply acting like the type of person you already believe yourself to be. Every system of actions is built upon a system of beliefs. A democracy is founded on concepts like freedom and social equality. A dictatorship operates on absolute authority and strict obedience. You can attempt to encourage voting within a dictatorship, but that behavior is impossible under that specific set of beliefs. The system's identity rejects the action. Individuals follow the same pattern. If your identity is centered on consumption rather than creation, you will find yourself pulled towards spending even when you have a goal to save money. Sustained behavior modification fails when the new action is incongruent with the underlying self-image. Entrepreneur Brian Clark spent years trying to stop chewing his fingernails using mindful willpower. This timeline shows the volatility of that approach. It required constant effort to maintain a temporary result. He eventually scheduled a professional manicure, thinking the financial cost of maintaining his nails would act as a deterrent. This led to a cognitive pivot. The manicurist pointed out that, aside from the chewing, he had healthy, attractive nails.
For the first time, Clark felt proud of his nails. This external validation bypassed his process and reached his identity. When we become proud of a specific aspect of our appearance or skill, we naturally develop habits to protect it. Pride acts as a maintenance mechanism for the self-image. Adherence becomes effortless once the habit is tied to who you are. You no longer have to convince yourself to train or work. You are simply defending the type of person you believe yourself to be. If beliefs dictate our actions, we must identify where those beliefs originate. The Latin roots of the word identity are essentitas, meaning being, and identidem, meaning repeatedly. Your identity is quite literally your repeated beingness. Think of your subconscious as a ledger. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. One-off experiences have little impact. Kicking a ball once does not make you a soccer player, just as writing one page doesn't instantly make you a writer. But as you repeat these actions, the evidence accumulates. You don't need a unanimous vote to change your self-image. You just need a mathematical majority over time. Identity is an emergent property. It is built bit by bit, habit by habit, through the evidence provided by your daily actions. This is the outward-facing behavioral architecture. The center, the identity, is the North Star that guides the processes and defines the outcomes. We evolve through a process of continuous cognitive editing. We change our habits to upgrade and expand who we are. This leads to a simple two-step algorithm. First, decide who you want to be. Second, prove it to yourself with small wins. Your internal systems constantly reconfigure to align with the evidence you provide. Every page written or workout started is a vote for a new you. Better habits are not about achieving external measures of success like money or weight loss. The real utility of a habit is its ability to change your deepest beliefs about yourself. Ultimately, you become your habits.
All right, we're about to dive into a huge idea, one that might just flip everything you think you know about building good habits completely on its head. So let's just get right to it. It's a question we've all struggled with, right? You want to change a bad habit, start a good one, but how do you actually truly make it stick? You know the drill. Our first instinct is to blame ourselves. We think, I just need more willpower, or if only I could get more motivated. We treat it like it's some kind of deep character flaw. But what if that's not the real story?
What if the answer is way, way simpler and a whole lot more powerful? What if it's not about what's inside you, but what's literally all around you, your environment?
Okay, to really get this, I want to tell you a story. It's a fascinating little experiment that took place in a hospital cafeteria, and it shows perfectly how our surroundings quietly shape everything we do. So there's this doctor, Anne Thorndike, and she has this, well, honestly, it's a kind of crazy idea. She bets that she can get people to eat healthier without talking to them, without motivating them, and without them having to use any willpower whatsoever. So her plan was to run a 6-month study and tweak what she called the choice architecture. Now that sounds super fancy, but it really just means changing the way choices are presented. And the testing ground? A busy hospital cafeteria. The method? Just redesigning the space. And you won't believe how simple the changes were. Seriously. Before, the main refrigerators right by the cash registers were just full of soda. All the researchers did was add water as an option right there beside it. They also put a few baskets of bottled water near the food stations. That's it. Soda was still there, but water was suddenly way more visible.
The results? Whoa. They were immediate and they were dramatic. In just 3 months, soda sales dropped by over 11%. At the same time, sales of bottled water shot up by almost 26%. And the craziest part? No one said a word to anybody. It just happened.
And this leads us to this incredibly important takeaway. We all like to think we make choices based on what we want, but this experiment proves that, a lot of the time, we choose things simply because of their location. The most obvious choice is the most likely choice.
So what is happening here? What's the science behind all this? Well, let's dig into the invisible force that's driving so much of what we do every single day. You know, this isn't some brand new idea. Way back in 1936, a psychologist named Kurt Lewin came up with this really elegant little equation. B equals F of PE. It just means that our behavior is a function of the person in their environment. Our actions are always a product of both who we are and where we are. That Cafeteria study is just a perfect example of Lewin's equation in the wild.
And once you see this, you start seeing it everywhere. Supermarkets are masters of this. That's why the expensive brands are right at eye level. It's why something like 45% of Coca-Cola sales come from those big displays at the end of the aisle. They're just obvious. It's the same reason we grab that donut someone left in the break room or stop at Starbucks. Convenience and visibility are king.
So why is our environment so influential? The reason is biological. Get this. The human body has about 11 million sensory receptors. A mind-blowing 10 million of those are dedicated just to sight. Some experts even think that half of our brain's resources are used for vision. We are visual creatures, through and through.
And that biological fact leads us straight to the core strategy. If you want to change what you do, the easiest, most powerful thing you can do is change what you see. Visual cues are the biggest catalyst for our behavior. So here's the really good news in all this. You don't have to be a victim of your environment. You are not just a passenger reacting to the world. You can be the architect. The strategy is actually pretty simple. You need to redesign your world to make the triggers for your good habits totally obvious and the triggers for your bad habits pretty much invisible. You're just making the right choice, the easiest choice. Here are some super simple but really powerful examples. Want to remember to take your medication? Put the bottle right next to the faucet. You'll see it every night. Want to practice guitar more? Get it out of the case and put the stand right in the middle of the living room. Want to eat more fruit? Stop hiding it in the crisper drawer and put it in a bowl on the counter. Make your good intentions impossible to ignore.
But, it gets even deeper than that, because our brains don't just tie a habit to a single little cue. Over time, we start to connect our habits to the entire context where they happen. The whole room becomes the cue.
Just think about your home for a second. What's your couch for? For one person, that couch is the spot where they read a book every single night. But for someone else, it's where they watch TV and eat ice cream and scroll on their phone. When one space has all these mixed up cues, it leads to mixed up habits. And this leads us to a really powerful, super easy mantra to help design our lives for success. One space, one use. You want to clean up your habits by giving each activity its own dedicated home. So here's how you can put that into practice. Even if you're in a tiny apartment, you can create zones. This chair is only for reading. This little corner of the kitchen table is only for work. The goal is just to stop sending your brain mixed signals. You want to make it crystal clear what's supposed to happen where. Give every habit a home. And that really is the ultimate point here. This isn't about restricting yourself. It's about empowering yourself. It's about making that mental shift from being a passive consumer of the world around you to being the active, intentional designer of it. What if I told you that everything you've ever been taught about self-control is, wrong? We're all raised on this idea that breaking bad habits is all about grit, about pure willpower. But what if the real secret has almost nothing to do with how disciplined you are? In this explainer, we are going to unpack a truly counterintuitive idea from Atomic Habits that could totally change the way you go after your goals. To really get this, we've got to go back in time. We're going to dive into a puzzling story from the Vietnam War, a real mystery that completely turned our understanding of addiction, habits, and self-control on its head. So picture this. It's 1971. A couple of congressmen are visiting Vietnam, and they stumble upon something absolutely shocking. After some follow-up research, it's confirmed. A staggering 20% of U.S. soldiers over there were addicted to heroin. And look, this wasn't just a few isolated cases. We're talking about a full-blown epidemic. 1 in every 5 soldiers. Now, to really understand why this was causing such a panic, you have to know what things were like back then. For a typical heroin user in the States, the odds of beating the addiction were just awful. After getting out of rehab and going back to their old neighborhood, the relapse rate was about 90%, a 9 in 10 chance of failure. That was the brutal reality. But here is where the story takes a massive twist. When the soldiers who were addicted in Vietnam finally came home, something absolutely incredible happened. A researcher named Lee Robbins discovered that 9 out of 10 of them just stopped, almost overnight. It completely defied everything people thought they knew. So the question is, how on earth was that possible? You have to realize, this one single study was a bombshell. It just shattered the conventional wisdom of the day. It basically suggested that even a horribly powerful addiction like heroin wasn't necessarily a life sentence, that under the right circumstances, it could almost seem to just fade away. So what was the secret?
It wasn't some superhuman display of willpower. No, it was something way simpler and honestly way more profound. It was a radical change in their environment, and that is the key that unlocks this entire mystery.
Let's just break this down because it's so clear when you see it side by side. In Vietnam, a soldier was surrounded by an absolute minefield of triggers. You've got the constant, unimaginable stress of war, you've got easy access to heroin, and you've got a social circle where other people are using. Then they get on a plane and fly home, and every single one of those cues, poof, gone. They're in a totally new context, with different friends, and the habit just didn't have the triggers it needed to survive.
And this discovery really flies in the face of a belief that is so deep in our culture, right? We're always told that bad habits are a moral failing, a weakness of character, a lack of discipline. We think, if I just tried harder, if I just had more willpower, I could beat this. But the Vietnam story tells us there's a much bigger force at play. So here's the kicker. Modern research backs this up completely. When scientists actually study people who appear to have superhuman self-control, they find out their secret. These people aren't fundamentally different from you or me. They don't have some secret reserve of willpower. Nope. They are simply better at building an environment where they don't need willpower in the first place. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. The people we think of as the most disciplined aren't constantly fighting off temptation. They're not white-knuckling it through their day. Instead, they've designed a disciplined environment that removes the temptation. It's about playing offense with your surroundings, not just playing defense with your willpower. It's a much smarter way to win the game. Okay, so we know the environment is ridiculously powerful. But why? What's actually happening in our brains that makes this all work? To get that, we need to geek out a little bit on the science of cues and cravings. I love this analogy. Think of your brain like a muddy field. The first time you do something, it's like forging a new path. But every time you repeat that habit, you're walking that same path, and it gets deeper and more defined. It becomes a well-worn groove. And even if you don't walk that path for years, the groove is still there, just waiting for the right cue to send you right back down it. This story about a therapist named Patty Owell is a perfect example. She had quit smoking decades ago. Around the same time, she'd also stopped riding horses. Well, many years later, she decides to get back on a horse, and the second she does, bam! An overwhelming, intense craving for a cigarette hits her for the first time in forever. The horse was the cue. It was the key that unlocked that old, dormant mental groove. There's actually a scientific name for this. It's called cue-induced wanting, and we have all felt this. It's when you're not even hungry, but you drive past your favorite pizza place and smell it, and suddenly you have to have a slice. Or you see a cookie jar on the counter and your brain just goes, I want that. The external cue creates the internal craving. And if you think that's wild, get this. These triggers can work on a level that's completely subconscious. In one famous study, scientists showed a picture of cocaine to drug addicts for just 33 milliseconds. Okay, that is way too fast for your conscious mind to even register what it saw. And yet, it was still enough to light up the reward centers in their brains and spark a desire. That's how deep these environmental cues run. All right, this brings us to the most practical and, honestly, the most important part of all of this. How do we actually use this knowledge in our own lives? Well, the answer is to completely reframe the problem. Stop seeing self-control as a daily battle of you versus your urges. Instead, start thinking like an architect and redesign the battlefield itself. Here's the hard truth. Relying on willpower alone is a losing strategy. It's a short-term fix. It's like trying to swim against a strong river current. Sure, you might make some progress for a little while, but eventually you're going to get tired. And the current of your environment, it never gets tired. It will always win in the long run. The only effective long-term strategy is to change the direction of the current.
So what does this look like day to day? It's about being ruthless in removing the cues for your bad habits. Can't focus on your work? Don't just try to ignore your phone. That takes energy. Physically put it in another room. Feeling that social media envy? Don't just scroll past it. Unfollow the accounts that trigger that feeling. Watching too much TV? Easy. Take the TV out of the bedroom. The key is to make the trigger invisible. You're cutting the habit off at the source before it even has a chance to start.
This quote from James Clear in Atomic Habits just says it all. I have never seen someone consistently stick to positive habits in a negative environment. It's such a powerful reminder. You can't out-discipline a bad environment forever. It's just not going to happen. The secret is to make sure your environment is on your team, not working for the opposition. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge, a question to really think about.
What is one cue, just one, that you can remove from your environment today? What's one tiny change you can make that makes the right choice the easy choice and the bad choice just a little bit harder? And hey, if you found this detailed summary valuable, if this gave you something to think about, please hit that like button. It really helps us out. Even better, share your feedback in the comments. And of course, subscribe to Detailed Book Summary for more deep dives into life-changing books just like this one. Thanks for being here.